The snow didn't fall like a blessing that year. It drifted down like a sentence, gray, relentless. Heavy, the wind knifed through the mining town of Calico Ridge, carrying the scent of coal smoke and frozen meat and the faint sound of a child's cough. Boards creaked beneath boots worn too thin, and somewhere, the saloon piano played an off-key lullaby for men who had long since stopped hearing music, in the shadow of the butcher's awning. She knelt, not to pray. That season of her life was long gone. Etta Greaves held out a trembling hand to a man who wouldn't meet her eyes. His coin clinked against her palm like judgment, and her voice, cracked from cold and shame, murmured thanks she no longer meant. 5 children waited for her in a shack outside town. No fire, no bread, no hope, so she did what a mother does when the world turns its back. She bartered her name, her body, her soul, 1 hour at a time. No one stopped her. Not the sheriff who passed by with snow crusting his mustache. Not the preacher who closed his door when she knocked with bare fingers. Not the women who clutched their shawls tighter when she walked by. She was a ghost in their world. And ghosts don't cry, but one pair of eyes lingered. From across the street by the forge a man stood still, not gawking, not judging, just watching. He wore a brown coat with patched elbows, a burn scar on his neck peeking from under the collar. His hands were rough, tucked into gloves stitched too many times. Beside him, a small boy leaned against his hip, clutching a sack of apples. The boy asked something, and the man replied without looking away from her. Then he walked on, slowly, but not in disgust. That was the first time she saw Silas Boone. The next night, the cold bit deeper. She didn't kneel this time. She stood under the lanterns outside the brothel's edge, arms folded over a threadbare shawl, face turned from the street. Men came, one by one, some gentle, some cruel. She stopped seeing the difference. It wasn't her body they broke. That had already happened years ago, when the soldiers burned her home and her husband's head. Hit the cabin floor with a wet crack? It was her silence they took now. The kind that made her forget what her own voice sounded like when it wasn't begging. That's when he came again. Not like the others? No swagger, no coins held out. He simply walked past her, then stopped. Ma'am, he said softly, as if addressing someone he respected. She didn't look up. I've got stew on the stove. There's enough for you, and your little ones. She flinched, as if slapped. No one had said their names in weeks. Not since the town labeled them as leeches, mouths too many and futures too small. What's the price? She asked, voice low. None, he said. That's a lie. He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, he said. But if it is, it's mine to carry. Not yours, she didn't answer. Just turned and vanished into the alley's throat. The next morning she found something on the doorstep. A tin of biscuits. A wool blanket, a carved wooden horse, no note. No name, but in the distance. Smoke curled from a cabin across the hill, the same man's boy sitting on the porch, whittling with a dull knife, 2 cups of steam rising beside him. Her children devoured the biscuits like wolves. They didn't ask where it came from, they knew better. Gifts were dangerous things, they came with ropes, but when the youngest girl, Ruthie, fell asleep that night holding the wooden horse. Against her ribs, Etta stood outside in the wind, teeth clenched against something ancient, the ache of kindness. 3 days later, a storm rolled in, not the kind made of snow. This one rode on horseback. 4 men from down south, coats slick with blood and arrogance. They rode into town with rifles slung low and badges that weren't from any lawman worth naming. Word was they hunted deserters and took women for sport. Etta heard the name hissed at the general store, Riker. She'd heard it once before. On the lips of a man who held her wrist too tight one night and bragged about his time cleansing old counties. That night, she didn't go to the brothel. She ran to the edge of town and buried the children under the floorboards of the shack, gave them crusts. Gave them her coat? Then she stood outside the door all night, shotgun in her hand, knowing full well it only had one shell. No one came, but dawn didn't bring peace. It brought a knocked-out asterisk, not heavy, not cruel, just a single rap, then silence. She opened the door to see Silas Boone standing there with a sack of flour, a jar of honey, and eyes that saw too much. "You don't have to keep burying them," he said. And for the first time in years, Etta felt something snap, not in anger, not in fear, but in grief. She fell to her knees. The shotgun slid from her hands, and before she could tell him to leave, he knelt with her. Not to comfort, not to rescue, but simply to be there. The snow fell around them like ashes. And for a moment, the world held its breath. The stove hissed softly in the corner, not the crackle of roaring flame, just a low whisper of heat trying to hold back the chill that crept in through every board and nail. Etta sat at the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea she hadn't asked for. Her fingers twitched now and then, half expecting to be struck for touching something that wasn't hers. But no blow came. Silas moved quietly around the cabin, spooning stew into bowls, pausing only to check the boys. Bandaged hand. The child, maybe 8 or 9, looked up at Etta only once, wide gray eyes filled with the kind of silence she knew too well. The kind that grows in children who've seen too much and been spoken to too little. What's his name? She finally asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He just handed her a bowl. Jacob, he said. Doesn't talk much. Never did, even before his mama passed. Etta nodded slowly. Her own children didn't talk much either. Not after they'd watched her sell herself to keep them warm. That kind of silence spreads like frost. It finds the cracks and lives there. By the second week, the rhythm changed. She didn't come begging. He didn't offer charity. But there was something between them now, not a bond exactly. More like a mutual understanding. A truce drawn in bread and firewood. Sometimes she brought firewood to his porch, her children walking behind her like shadows. Sometimes he left extra meat on her steps with no explanation. There were no questions. No expectations. Only acts. Quiet ones. One night, as a storm howled through the ridge, she saw his silhouette working under the lantern, mending the barn roof before the snow caved it in. She almost turned away, but something held her. She crossed the yard, picked up the other end of the beam, and said nothing. He didn't thank her. He just passed her the next nail. That was their way. One morning, her son Micah found something in the woods, a broken wagon, burned at the edges, and a satchel with a piece of cloth tied around it, Confederate gray. Stained red. Silas froze when she showed it to him. The boy didn't notice, but Etta did, the way his jaw locked, the way his eyes flickered with something older than fear. Was it yours? She asked. Silas nodded once. No shame in it. No pride either. I was a medic. Pulled bodies from rivers, lost more than I saved. He traced the seam of the cloth with one finger. Used to believe in causes. Then I watched what men do when they think God is only on their side. She didn't push. She just sat down beside him and stared into the trees, where the wind howled like wolves who'd forgotten how to hunt. Later that week, the trouble came. The men from the south, Riker's kind, had been drinking hard at the tavern. No law in town strong enough to hold them, and no preacher brave enough to try. One of them, a scar-faced brute with a broken-tooth smile, followed Etta home. She didn't hear him until the floor creaked behind her. She turned. His eyes were bloodshot. His hand was on his belt. He grinned. Then something slammed into the back of his head, hard. The man crumpled, and behind him stood Jacob. The boy held a shovel with both hands, shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. His lips were pale, his breath came ragged, but his eyes burned. Etta caught him before he fell. Silas came running minutes later. He didn't speak. Just carried the man's body to the river and came back without a word. That night, The boy sat in Eda's lap and cried for the first time, asterisk not loud. Not wild, just one long sob that started in his gut and refused to stop. Eda held him. No one tried to make sense of it. Asterisk some things aren't meant to be explained. Only endured. The next day she found a letter, asterisk folded into the basket of eggs Silas had left at her door, asterisk the handwriting was uneven. Stiff, it read, greater than you don't owe me anything. But I can't watch you freeze while I stand beside a warm fire. If you ever want to leave this town, really leave, there's a trail through Bear Hollow that leads east. I've walked it before, it's hard. But it's better than here, asterisk if you want to go, I'll walk it with you. If not, I'll stay quiet. Asterisk either way, you and your children are worth more than the weight you've been told to carry. No signature, none was needed. She didn't answer that day. Or the next, asterisk she just kept doing what she had to, chopping wood, feeding mouths, dodging stares, but inside her something stirred. Not love, not yet, asterisk something older. Something simpler, asterisk the idea that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone. One evening, she went to the graveyard just beyond the old church. Asterisk her husband's marker was barely legible, burned in the fire, then left to rot. She knelt by it, traced the blackened letters, and whispered to the earth, asterisk, I did what I had to. I kept them alive. Then, through tears she didn't plan to shed, she added, and now I want more. The wind didn't answer, but far off in the trees, she saw smoke curling from a chimney. It felt like an invitation. Asterisk she gathered her children that night. Asterisk she told them nothing, only that they'd need to pack light. Asterisk they didn't ask questions. Asterisk they'd learned long ago that survival sometimes walks in silence. Silas was waiting at the edge of the woods by dawn. He didn't speak when she arrived, just nodded once and handed her a scarf. They walked into the hollow, together, asterisk behind. Then the town slept, unaware that something holy had just left its borders. Asterisk. The trail through Bear Hollow was not marked on any map. Asterisk it carved its way, between cliffs scarred by landslides and valleys where the wind moaned like a widow in mourning. Trees stood blackened from an old fire, maybe lightning, maybe men. Snow still clung to their branches, and the path was mostly mud and shattered rock. Asterisk they walked in silence. Asterisk Eda in front with two children strapped to her sides. The older three walked behind her, feet bleeding into their boots. Silas carried Jacob, whose cough had returned with the cold. The boy didn't complain. None of them did. They were used to pain. What they weren't used to was the feeling rising in their chests, something between terror and hope. A quiet flutter like a candle trying not to go out. On the third day the storm came. Asterisk not rain. Not snow, men hooves pounded from the ridge above. 5 riders, the same men who had hunted her in town, now barreled down the slope. Rifles slung loose, dust curling from their heels like smoke from hell. Asterisk Silas shouted for the children to run. They scattered behind a ridge, hearts pounding, breath clouding in the cold. Asterisk Eda didn't move. She stood still in the path, arms raised, shoulders trembling. Asterisk, you came for me, she said. Asterisk Riker pulled his horse to a halt inches from her. Asterisk the man looked different now, dirtier, wilder, but the smirk was the same. Asterisk, I told you I'd collect what's owed. Darlin', he said. You should have stayed where you belonged. Asterisk Silas stepped forward from the trees, shotgun in hand. He didn't speak. His eyes said everything. Asterisk. Ah, Riker sneered. The broken soldier. You got a death wish too? Asterisk, I already died. Silas said, years ago, you're just walking on the grave. Asterisk, the first shot rang out. Not from Silas, from the man behind Riker. Asterisk, it grazed Silas's shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. Asterisk Eda dropped to the ground, dragging a child beneath her. The air exploded with thunder. Silas fired once, clean and close. One man dropped like a stone. Asterisk, then came the chaos, horses rearing, mud flying, children screaming from behind the rocks. Asterisk, another shot. Silas fell to his knees. Asterisk Riker dismounted, walked slowly. Rifle lowered, he grinned, stepping over Silas's bleeding body. "You thought you could save her?" he said. "You're nothing. Just another lost man in the woods." I don't need saving, Ada said. And that's when she raised the axe. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't clean, but it was final. The sound was dull, wet, and when it was over, Riker collapsed into the mud, eyes wide with something too slow to understand. She stood over him, hands shaking, face pale, and then she dropped the axe. Silas bled through his coat, breath coming shallow. Etta knelt beside him, tore strips from her shawl, pressed them to the wound. "You're not dying here," she whispered. He looked at her through blurred eyes. Don't carry this," he said. "Not for me." She didn't answer, just pressed harder and told the children to pray. They found shelter in an old trapper's hut 2 miles deeper. Silas drifted in and out for 3 days. Sometimes he muttered names from the war. Sometimes he whispered hers. Etta sat by his side the whole time. Her children gathered around the fire, taking turns watching the door. They'd learned life doesn't offer safety, only moments between storms. On the 4th morning, Silas opened his eyes. The fever had broken. The blood had stopped. Etta didn't cry. She just sat beside him and whispered, "You're late." He smiled, barely, and rasped, "Had to make an entrance." She took his hand, rough, warm. "I buried him," she said. "The one who hunted me." Silas nodded slowly. "He'll stay buried," he said, "with the others." They didn't speak again that day. There was no need. Spring came early in the lowlands. They crossed the ridge in late March and found a homestead abandoned near the river. Roof mostly intact, a well out back. A broken fence that Silas fixed one board at a time. The children planted potatoes in the thawed ground. Jacob carved a swing from old rope and a branch. Ruthie began humming again, not a song exactly, but the sound of something returning. Etta sewed curtains from flour sacks, hung them in the windows, not to block out the world, but to welcome light in. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in rust and gold, Silas sat with her on the porch. Jacob dozed against his side. The others played by the creek, voices rising like wind chimes. He looked at her hands, still calloused, still trembling now and then. "You ever wish it had gone different?" he asked. Etta didn't answer. Right away, then she turned and looked at him, really looked. "I used to wish I'd never been born," she said. "But now," she took a breath, "now I'm just glad I lived long enough to see this." He didn't speak. Just reached out, took her hand, and squeezed it gently. They watched the children chase fireflies. And for the first time in years, the silence between them was full. The past didn't disappear. It lingered in the scars. The nightmares, the way Etta flinched when doors slammed too hard. But it didn't own them anymore. They had built something here, not perfect, not easy, but real, and real was more than either of them ever dared to hope for. If you've ever carried shame like a coat you couldn't take off. If you've ever protected someone at your own expense. If you've ever survived something that should have broken you, then let your voice be heard in the comments. Because somewhere out there, someone's waiting for a stranger to say, "You're worth more than what hurt you." And sometimes all it takes is one quiet hand, to bring you back into the light.